Week here off. Let's just make sure that our brains are clear on the subject matter. If you break the book up into two parts, the first part is chapters 1 through 6, which is about it's going to be about division, immorality. But why do we break up 1 through 6 into one section? It's about a report from Chloe's people, okay? And then the second part is chapter 7 through 16, and what's that about? It's going to be, letter from the Corinthian church. Okay. And then in that part about chapter 1 through 6, chapter 1 through what is about, 1 through 4 is about division. And break it down, each of those chapters, there's a different element we're dealing with, but chapters 1 through 4 is about division in the church. Chapter 5 through is about immorality, and you look at that. There's really two major topics in there. Number one was the man who had his father's wife, and number two was brethren suing each other and going to court with one another. Then you move into the second half, and you have chapter 7 through 7. What's it about? Marriage. Okay, and then chapter 8 through 10 is about meat sacrificed to idols. And you can break that down into its various parts, but ultimately it comes down to you have to factor in how what you do affects others. So even if it's right, if it's doing harm to somebody else, then it's doing wrong. So you have to not just factor in what I can do and have a right to do, but you have to also factor in the consequences of it. And really that could all fall under the heading of wisdom, couldn't it? That there's things that when I show love towards somebody else require me to show wisdom in how I act. It's not just whether or not it's technically okay, it's whether or not it is beneficial as well. And that's where Paul makes a point that all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. So then chapter 11 through 14 is about worship. And we've gone down, and we're down in chapter 13 at this point, and we're dealing with love. And really, in certain respects, you could say this is the most vital chapter in all of 1 Corinthians. It's certainly, I think, the most quoted chapter. Because you talk about 1 Corinthians 13, talks about love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, does not seek its own. How many times had those words been quoted in sermons, in books, at the Lord's Supper table? How many times? I'm just over and over and over again. And so that's the chapter we're in right now. Now after that chapter, we'll move to chapter 15, which is about a resurrection, and then chapter 16, which is concluding remarks. Okay, yeah. So here in chapter 13, so if you go over to 1 Corinthians 13, we've covered about half of this chapter at this point, but we did it at a pretty slow pace, and the reason for that is because every single aspect of love is a pretty big deal, isn't it? And so Paul started the whole thing out by saying, no matter how good of a person I am, if I make great sacrifices in my life, if I have great wisdom, if I'm an eloquent speaker and I don't have love, what good is it? Just a total waste. And really, you could bring that down. A great example of that would be you have that story of Christ, and he was sitting there in the temple, and he saw the widow come in, and she brought in 2 mites to contribute, just 2 little pennies, basically. And then all these other men who were wealthy men, and they were contributing giant bags of money, which was the one that Christ was impressed with? It was those 2 mites. Now those other guys, they gave lots and lots of money. But was it an act of love? No, it wasn't an act of love, was it? It was out of their excess, as Christ says. Whereas this woman, she loved the Lord, she had great faith, and she gave all that she had. And so, without love in the equation, everything is lost. Now, you take the Corinthian church, and they are a great example of that, and that's why I think you could say 1 Corinthians 13 is really kind of the heart of the problem for the Corinthians is you look at all the division that they've been facing. I mean, we've been spending all these chapters talking about division, right? And every different way that they were fighting, arguing, bickering, disagreeing, disputing with each other in every way you could possibly imagine. Why? I mean, if you want to put it down into one word, why all that division happened, why? Lack of love, right? Love's the issue, isn't it? If they'll get this message, then everything else falls into place. The man who had his father's wife. Well, was that man showing love toward God? Certainly not. Was he showing love toward his father? Certainly not. Was he showing love towards the woman? Certainly not, right? And so sin, well, will love get rid of sin? Yeah, it will. Will love get rid of personality conflicts? Yeah, it will. Will love help us to forgive? In every aspect of your life, if you'll have love, it'll handle the problem, won't it? And so, as Paul looks at it, he's pointed out a bunch of different things. One of the things he says, love suffers long, and we talked about that. It's that patient love. It keeps going and going and going, and it puts up with things that you wouldn't normally put up with. Love is kind. It's got that gentleness to it. It's got that friendliness to it. Love does not envy. Love rejoices with those who rejoice and weeps with those who weep, right? When something good happens to my brother, do I say, boy, why didn't that happen to me? No, I just rejoice with him. I find joy in their joy. And when bad things happen to other people, I weep with them. And so love doesn't have that envying quality. Love is not green. Love does not parade itself. It's not interested in look at me, look at me, look at me. How many times do you see people living their life that way where all it is about look at me? You could say really the entire Hollywood industry is built around what? Look at me, right? And you say, well, why do those people have so many problems? Well, they are raised, especially you take some of those child actors, mom and dad raised them from the beginning. What makes you a success as a child actor? When everybody's looking at you. And so they get up and they grow up and they become adults, and those child actors become adult actors, and they have all of these problems. Well, why? Love. They never learned to love. They never learned to not parade themselves. They were taught the opposite. Love is not puffed up. Now, remember back in the issue of meat sacrificed to idols, Paul said, knowledge puffs up, but love does what? Remember, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. Yeah. Now, if I'm a very knowledgeable person and I know a lot, then it's real easy for me to get a big head, just get a puffed up attitude. He said, but love will take a knowledgeable person, and instead of people going, wow, they know so much, but you kind of secretly don't like them because they always let you know that they know so much, it takes a knowledgeable person and it makes it so that they do good. Somebody with a great amount of knowledge in the church, can they do any good? You better believe they can, right? I mean, isn't that what you're doing right now, is trying to gain knowledge? I mean, you're not sitting here just for your health, right? So you want to learn more about this book so that you can know more. Well, if you're puffed up, the more you learn, the more damage you'll cause. So really the answer is if somebody's going to be puffed up, it'd be better off if they didn't have knowledge. Because that's what happens, is you use it as a baseball bat to hit other people, to do damage. But if you have love, what does knowledge do now? Now it helps others, doesn't it? I know more so I can help other people. So I have knowledge so I can stop doctrinal problems. I have knowledge so I know what to say to somebody when they ask me a spiritual question. I'll have that. I'll be ready to make a defense, as Peter says. So love is the answer that makes everything work. If you're very knowledgeable and you don't have love, it's useless. But if you do have love, it becomes a vehicle for change. And you can say that about everything. And that was Paul's point in the very beginning of the chapter, wasn't it? No matter how talented you are, if you have not got love, it'll be useless. But if you do have love, no matter what your talents are, they're going to be used in a positive way, aren't they? Love will edify. Love does not behave rudely. And rudely is kind of one of those funny things. You try and explain to somebody what rude is. And parents have this problem all the time because kids behave rudely, don't they? I mean, how many times do kids just open their mouth and say what they're thinking? And then the parents just kind of grimace. Oh, even if you're right, kid, you shouldn't have, little kid comes out of the store and they look at a person and go, Mommy, look at that fat man. Now, that's right, isn't it? But it's behaving rudely, isn't it? No, that's not how you act. Trying to teach children about not being rude is a difficult thing because they'll take it as, well, I just told the truth. But what is rude? Rude is when you say things without regard for the other person's feelings, right? You're not cautious about the way you say things. You just say, well, if it's right, and I'm just going to say it. And many Christians live their life that way, don't they? They say, well, I'm right, I got the truth, and so tough. Well, that's rude, right? And so as you go through it, love does not behave rudely. Now, this is where we start getting down to ones that we've not looked at so much. Love does not seek its own. So here's love, and you say, well, love doesn't seek its own. What does that mean? Well, what is the natural thing for you to do? When you get up in the morning and you think about the things you're going to do that day, what are you normally thinking about? Yeah, I think about me. I need to get myself some breakfast. I need to do this for myself. I need to get this done so that I can make some money. And your to-do list will naturally fall into the category me. Well, love says, no, I'm going to take my to-do list, the things that I'm going to get done through my day, my week, my life, and it starts adding in things that benefit other people. And the more we love, the more we start fitting in things that benefit other people. Now, does that mean that you don't ever get to do anything for yourself? No. Remember back in the book of Acts where Paul went to Troas, and they were there in Troas, and then after they left Troas, everybody got on the ship. Acts chapter 20, everybody got on the ship to go to the next place, and Paul walked. Well, why'd Paul walk? It wasn't faster. Why'd Paul walk versus taking the boat with everybody else to the next city? He did it for him, didn't he? He just needed some peace and quiet. Didn't he? He needed to get away from all these people who wanted his time. Same with Christ. Why'd Christ go up in the mountaintops to pray? Why'd he seclude himself at times? For him, right? Because he could have prayed just in front of everybody, but no, I need that time just for me. I need to... So when you say love does not seek its own, it doesn't mean you don't ever do anything for yourself, but it means that you are regarding other people's lives too. It's not all about me. And that's a very difficult thing to do, to begin looking, and when you look at any situation in life, instead of viewing it as, why didn't they do such and such for me? Why didn't they say this? Why didn't they come up and say hello to me? You start beginning to flip it on its end and say, well, why didn't I say hello to them? Why didn't I take time out to find out how they were doing? And you begin to look at life from the lens of, how does what I do affect other people and what is in their best interest? I'm no longer thinking about just what's in my best interest. I'm going to start thinking about what benefits others. And if what's beneficial to somebody is me telling them they're wrong and it may hurt their feelings, well, then I'm going to do that because it is what's in their best interest. But it's I'm going to make decisions off of what is beneficial, not off of what I want. Love is not provoked. Now here's another one we talk some about, where provoked is just simply, how do you provoke somebody? If you want to provoke a cattle to go somewhere, if you have a rancher and he wants to get the cattle to go from one place to another, how does he provoke a cow to move from one place to another? He just pokes them, doesn't he? Yeah, he's just going to prod them. Well, that's what provoking is prodding people. And in your life, how many times have you ever been prodded? Somebody poked at you, pushed your buttons. Oh, just every day. And on top of it, who's the best at it? I mean, if we're really honest with ourselves, the people who are the best at pushing our buttons are the people closest to us, aren't they? They know everything to get you upset. Well, what does love do? It says, I'm not going to let people push my buttons anymore. I'm not going to let them dictate my choices. So if somebody behaves in a bad way, I'm not going to let my emotions decide what I do. Now, if somebody makes me upset, is it okay for me to be angry? Scriptures say it's okay to get angry if somebody mistreats you. Yeah, but that's it. Lee says, be angry, but do not sin. There's the key to the whole thing, right? Now, if I get angry because somebody mistreated me, but I still watch what I say, I bridle my tongue, as James says, I make sure that I don't do anything, I don't say anything or behave in a way that is sinful, then what I can say is I just acted in a loving way. I did not allow myself to be provoked into doing the wrong thing. And you can see this in the world around us is because how the world gets really happy when they can provoke a Christian, right? Because if they can provoke you, then they go, ha, you're just like me. And now all of a sudden they can pin down that, see, you just behave just like everybody else. Love thinks no evil. Now, this is the same idea as what James talks about. If you go over to the book of James, and you look over in James chapter 1, and in James chapter 1, he says, down in verse 14, let's start verse 13. James 1 verse 13, he says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed, and then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Now, where does all sin start? Does it start with God, first of all? No, God never tempts us. So where does it start? James says it starts in my mind, doesn't it? It says it's when I am drawn away by my own desires. So here it is, when a thought pops into my brain that is not a good one, I've not yet sinned. Just because I think about doing the wrong thing. Just like we were talking about, you can get angry but not sin. You know, you get angry and you think about all the mean things you're going to say to somebody. Have I sinned yet? But now, what happens if I go home and I just think on all those things, just over and over and over? I would have said this and I would have said that. Oh, I know what I'll say next time I see him. Now, at some point, there's a difference between thinking and thinking, isn't there? You know, when it first pops into your head, a bad thought, that's one thing. But then if you spend the next 2 days dwelling and rehearsing evil, obsessing, that's a good word for it, dwelling upon it, that's a different thing. Yeah, that's another good word, plotting. Yeah, we know the difference, don't we? Now, where's the line? Here's the problem is, where's the line? Does the line happen after the first 5 minutes? Or 30 seconds? Or 2 hours? In other words, you can't draw an exact line, can you? I can't tell you exactly where it moves from just thinking to plotting and obsessing. But I know there's a line there, don't I? Or we know the two both exist and they're not the same. That's what this is talking about when it says love thinks no evil. Love does not just kind of obsess over evil things, and it gives people the benefit of the doubt. You know, when you hear something about somebody, and it could go either way, right? Paul Hawthorne, preacher down in Federal Way, one of his favorite stories is one time his car broke down and he had to walk into a tavern because it was the only place that had a phone. And so he walked into a tavern and he used the phone in there and he walked out, and all of a sudden it struck him that maybe some people would have seen him coming out of that tavern. Now nobody did, but he actually told the congregation, he got services, and he said if anybody saw me coming out of the tavern, then this is why. But imagine for a second somebody did see you coming out of a tavern after you went there, used the phone because your car broke down. So here it is, I see Steve coming out of the tavern. Now, I have a choice at that point, don't I? I can assume that Steve's a drunkard. I could assume that, couldn't I? Wouldn't necessarily be accurate, but I could assume it. Or I could say, no, I'm not going to think any evil about Steve. I'm going to give Steve the benefit of the doubt. There's probably more to it than that. Now, I may end up talking to Steve about it and find out that, no, he really is a drunkard. In other words, I could find out that even though I thought no evil about him, that he really was doing the wrong thing, couldn't I? But I'm not going to jump to that conclusion about people. And this is where we get when we start kind of obsessing over things. Somebody says something to you and it upsets you, and what do you jump to? They said it because they're mean, ornery, stupid, whatever words you want to use, whatever it is you're thinking at the moment, you get riled up and you saw them do one thing and you ascribe bad motives to it, don't you? That's thinking evil. Is when you're no longer thinking the best of people. Now, when you think and give people the benefit of the doubt, are you going to be wrong sometimes? Yeah, you absolutely will. You'll give people the benefit of the doubt, and then you end up finding, no, I was trying to give them the benefit that they were really a good person, just made a mistake, but no, actually, they really are scum. Right? There are people like that out there. But now let me ask you, if you have to have two people that you're going to choose which ones you're going to be friends with, which one do you want to be friends with? The one who will give you the benefit of the doubt, even though they're going to be wrong sometimes, or the one that's going to naturally assume anytime you do something wrong that you're scum? Which one do you want to be friends with? Well, I'll take the one that's going to give me the benefit of the doubt, right? Well, that's the kind of person we need to be. If that's the way you want to be treated, then that's the way we need to behave, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. If you would want somebody, if they saw you walking out of a tavern, to go and talk to you personally and ask you what were the circumstances surrounding it, well, then that's the kind of person you ought to be. Now, which is easier, by the way? If you did see somebody walking out of a tavern, which would be easier, to go and tell everybody that you saw so-and-so coming out of a tavern and kind of insinuate that you know they're a drunkard? Which is easier, to just kind of think that, or to go to them individually and confront them on it? It's a lot more work to confront somebody individually, isn't it, than to gossip? Gossip comes easy. But when I go and confront somebody individually, I'm putting something on the line, aren't I? All of a sudden now I've got that churning in my stomach. Because there's a chance when I confront him individually, if I go to Steve individually and I confront him, there's a possibility something's going to happen, right? One, I might find that Steve really is a drunkard. Now I'm going to have to do something about it, and that's going to be ugly. The other thing is even if he isn't, and there is a rational explanation, there's a chance Steve could get mad at me, isn't there? And then our friendship's just over. So it's easier to gossip behind somebody's back than it is to not think evil. But which one's loving? See, the loving one's to give Steve that chance, because that's what I'd want, right? Once again, if it were on the other foot and I was the one walking out of the tavern because my car broke down and Steve saw me, which one would I want? See, I'd want Steve to come to me individually. So what should I do? I do the same thing, right? It's a lot harder to have those kind of one-on-one conversations, but it's the right thing to do. It's the right way to behave. So love thinks no evil. Love does not rejoice in iniquity. Now this one is especially hard when when something bad happens to somebody you kind of feel like something bad should have happened to. Right? When you see bad things happen to bad people, what do you tend to think? They got it. They got what they deserve. About time, right? But you know what? If somebody's murdered, even if the person murdered was a pedophile, was it a good thing for them to be murdered? See, it's still a horrible thing, isn't it? You shouldn't rejoice in the death of any human being. There was a case when I guess it was about a year ago now, where there was an abortion doctor. That's all he did for a living. He was a doctor, but all he did was perform abortions all day long. So there's no doubt in your mind about what kind of person this guy is, right? And on top of it, to just kind of make it even more sickening, he was a deacon in his church. And you can talk all you want about what kind of church would have a guy like that as a deacon, but here's a guy, in his life, I think they figured out he personally had performed, I think it was over 40,000 abortions in his life. So, 40,000 murders. You know, you talk about serial killers and whatnot. This guy, 40,000 murders on his record. Well, he was at his church, and I can't remember what the name of the church was, but he was there. Guy walked up to him, pulled out a gun, shot him. Now, let's be honest about it. When you get the headlines, abortionist killed. Doesn't part of you kind of go, kind of nice, right? He's not doing anything more bad, is he? He's done. It stopped at that 40,000, whether it was 40,212 or 40,272. That's the last one he'll perform. Doesn't that part of you just want to say, boy, he got what he had coming. Now, I really had to face this because somebody from the town that guy was from wrote in to ask your preacher and asked who was wrong. Now, that's a hard question, isn't it? The abortionist? Who was wrong? The guy performing those abortions or the guy who pulled out a gun and shot him right in front of the church building? That's the answer, right? Both of them. So should I be patting the guy who pulled the gun out? Should I go and pat him on the back and say, good job, buddy? Should I even feel that way? But see, there's times where we do. And so this is one of those things where we have to have the same attitude towards sin as God has towards sin, which is, when does God like sin? Never. Does He like sin even when sin gets the job done? No. See, you take like Babylon, and God used Babylon, this mean, bloodthirsty nation, to destroy Israel and put them in captivity. Now, God used Babylon to get the job done, but then when He was done with it, what did He say about Babylon? Anybody remember? He said, you're a bunch of wicked people and you'll be destroyed for your iniquity, because sin is sin. And so there are some sins that are not as big of a deal to us, and then there are some that are a real big deal to us. And that's not really right, is it? We kind of are partial. We're picky about what sin. Some really are offensive to us, and some, well, that's not that big of a deal. Well, we got to watch that. Love does not rejoice in iniquity. There's no point where we just say, whew, I'm glad that person murdered that person. Another good example of this is, we have people who tell off-color jokes. And you get that on television a lot, those off-color jokes. That's kind of that blue humor, I think is the term they use. Well, it's kind of funny. But is it? No, it's iniquity, isn't it? When people are talking that way and talking in the inappropriate ways, it's wrong. And so, love doesn't rejoice in iniquity, not any type. There's no such thing as sin that's okay or not that big of a deal. The opposite side is love does rejoice in something. Love rejoices in truth. Now, here's where you get down and you say, well, first of all, when we say love rejoices in truth, what's the ultimate source of truth? God and the Bible that He's given us, right? So here's God. God is truth, and He's given us a Bible which is everything pertaining unto life and godliness. That's what Peter says on the subject. And so love rejoices in truth. So you and I, when God gives us a command that is hard to follow, what do? We have to just say, okay, I don't understand it, but I'm going to do it because it's the truth. Right? And almost every division in the church has happened, every big division in the church has happened because somebody came in and said, I don't like the way the church, fill in the blank. Wouldn't it be better if we, and they have something that they feel like would be more palatable than God's design for the church. Well, I can see that, right? You know, you talk about singing in the church. Would there be a way that we could, if we could just do whatever we wanted, would all of us singing like we're going to do tonight, would that be the most pleasing to the ears? If you could do anything? No, there'd be more pleasing to the ears ways of doing it, wouldn't it? We could mic the best singers. We start there. We could hire professional singers, couldn't we? I'm saying if we could do anything. Are there things that sound better to the human ear than what we do on Sundays? Sure. But would they be right? No. What does God want us to do? He says, I want you to sing. Well, what if I don't sound very good? I don't care. I want you to sing. That's the truth. That's what makes God happy. What makes God happy is our voices and our hearts being plucked. So love rejoices in the truth. And, you know, you look at those forks in the road and you talk about something like baptism and, so many people don't want to be baptized. And they don't want to say you have to be baptized to be saved. And it always comes down to, well, if I say that I have to be baptized to be saved, then that means this person was lost, and this person was lost, and this person, and they'll go down their family tree, right? Have you ever heard that? You know, it says, if I accept this as true, then all these other people are going to be affected by it. Well, here's the problem with that. If it's the truth, does it really matter? There's a problem, isn't it? If love rejoices in truth, as Christ said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. So how do you know whether you love God? You just do what He says. You keep His commandments. You rejoice in truth. So if God says be baptized, you say, I don't like that because I don't like the implications of it. Well, it is what it is, right? You could say that with about anything, couldn't you? I don't like how 1 + 1 = 2 because I don't like the implications of it. I don't like, people do this with finances. I don't like a budget because I don't like seeing how little money I have. Right? People do that a lot of the time. They say, I don't like to create a budget, and you end up finding the reason they don't want to make a budget is because they don't want to see how little money they have or how little money they think they have or how much debt they're in. Well, does not making a budget make the debt go away? No, the debt's still there whether you budget or not, isn't it? If you don't get baptized, does that bring salvation to your great-grandpa who wasn't baptized? Because you don't do it, it's going to save him? No. In other words, if baptism is necessary for salvation, it's necessary for salvation. And whether you do it or don't do it, it's not going to make one load of difference, is it? And so, love rejoices in truth. It says, if it's the truth, it's the truth. And you get to that point in your life where you say, I'm going to do the right thing. Why? Just simply because it's right. And you make that decision. Love bears all things. You talk about love bearing things, and when you bear something, you are carrying a load, aren't you? Say, I bore the weight. We were carrying the groceries out of the grocery store, and I took the groceries from my wife so that I would bear them to the car. I took the load. So you mean to tell me that if I'm going to show love, that I'm going to have to carry weights that aren't mine? Yes. That's the way it works, right? I'm going to start carrying groceries that aren't mine. I'm going to start helping little old ladies across the street, even though they're not my little old lady. Right? I'm going to start doing the right thing because it's the right thing. And so you go through it, and love starts to be done making excuses. Because that's one of the things we do in life, right? We make excuses why we don't do this or that. I don't need to do this because it's not my problem. Right? And you go through, well, it's not my problem. Well, that's true a lot of the time, right? If you look in the church and you look at all the different problems that people have, the different heartaches, how many are you responsible for? Your own, right? I mean, that's it, really. So, because I'm not responsible for somebody hurting over here, it's not my problem. Well, that's true unless you're going to show some love. You're going to show some love, then you're going to start carrying burdens that don't belong to you. And so you're going to start saying, well, I didn't do anything wrong. right? And you see this in marriages all the time. You know, there's that crossroads in a marriage, or you have a husband and a wife and they're arguing, and they both see it from their own side, and they both think they didn't do anything wrong. Okay, so we're going to spend the next 35 years staring at each other and saying it's your fault. Or somebody buckles, right? And somebody says, look, I'll be the bigger person. You know, I'm going to stop blaming you, and I'm going to just start being a part of this team. And so love bears things. It works as a unit. Love believes all things. And that comes back to that idea of thinking evil of people. It believes the best in people. Make them prove that they're wicked. You know? I mean, if somebody's a bad person, make them prove it to you. You know? And believe the best in people, and especially in the brotherhood. You know, I'm amazed how many times people in the church will just get this attitude about each other that they're a bad person. And it's like we've totally forgotten about the fact that everybody is here in the first place because they made a commitment to say that they love the Lord and want to serve Him, right? You know, two people won't sit on the same pew with each other because they're arguing with each other. Well, why are you even on the pew in the first place? You're both there because you care about God. So believe in the person, right? God believes in them. And so give people the benefit of the doubt. Love hopes all things. Now, when you talk about hope, hope's that desire and expectation like Lowell was talking about this morning. Well, it hopes all things. It's a glass half full kind of person. And once again, if you're going to have two people, which kind of person do you want to be around? Glasses half full person or glasses half empty? Which one's more enjoyable? You know? And so hope is this fuel, and it makes things get better. You know, when somebody wakes up in the morning and they have a hopeful attitude and they think, I can make a difference today and I can do good and I can be of use, and then the day turns out to be horrible, but they wake up the next day and they think the same thing. Today could be a good day and today I could do a lot. What kind of a difference does that type of person make? You know? You want to be the kind of person that believes that there are good things that can be done and that there's hope on the horizon and that all will turn out well. Because ultimately, if you're a Christian, will everything turn out right? Isn't that what Paul says over in Romans 8:28? All things work together for good. So today feels like a horrible day, but I can still be half full, right? You know, you can find this. Christians are the only people, I think, that can honestly, if somebody asks them, how you doing today, and they don't want to tell them about how all these bad things have happened to them today, I think Christians are the only people who, in all honesty, can say, I'm doing okay. Because, what do you mean? I just, you know, you lost your house today, 3 of your children burned in a fire, and you're telling me that you're okay? I think Christians are the only ones that can honestly say that. Because what we mean by that is, I'm going to be okay, right? I'll get through this. Now, people in the world can't honestly, realistically say that, but Christians can't. This will work out. I'll get through this thing. It'll turn out okay. I'm okay. And so, love has that hope, that driving force in it, and it hopes things in others, and it endures things. Well, you can see how these all begin to pile on each other too, can't you? You know, when you talk about love is not provoked and love endures all things, can you see how those two go hand in hand? Somebody keeps poking at you, and yet you endure. You just hang on. You're patient. You persevere. Love doesn't say quit. It just doesn't. It just keeps on trucking. And sometimes the only reason that people who love the Lord don't quit is because they don't like the alternative. You know, it's kind of like the old joke about birthdays. You know, people start getting up in years and they go, well, are you looking forward to your birthday? They go, well, it's better than the alternative, right? You know, I mean, it's better to hope, it's better to hang on another day than to not have a birthday and be dead. It's better to keep on going and not quit than to give up, because when you give up, everything's lost, right? And so love endures. It just keeps on fighting. You say, well, I don't know how I'm going to make it through tomorrow. Yeah, well, Scripture's made a provision for that when we don't feel like we're going to make it through tomorrow. What does it say? Each day has enough troubles of its own. Worry about today and let tomorrow take care of itself. Right? So you just do one thing at a time. Love endures. Love never fails. Now this one's scary because we have a saying around our house, as a lot of people do, which is never say never, right? Never is a word you don't use very often because most of the time it'll get you in trouble. Well, love never fails. Well, there's a lot of comfort, first of all, to be found in this because who's our perfect example of love? Isn't it Christ? So if Christ has perfect love, then when will His love fail on your behalf? When will He give up on you? Love never fails. So that's the model I'm striving for. Now, are there going to be times where I fail? Yeah, but I get back up again. That's what Proverbs says on it. Righteous man just gets back up again. Love never fails. You just always do your part. Now, regardless of what everybody else is doing, you say, I'm going to be loving. I'm going to not quit. I'm going to endure. And so as you talk about that characteristic of love, once again, here it is, you go through, and I have this problem because when you teach 1 Corinthians 13 and you teach on love, how long could I spend on this? Is there a sermon in every one of those points? There's probably about 5 sermons at least on each point. Well, okay, I could sit here and take forever, or I can go through at a faster pace and you kind of feel like at the end I go, well, have I covered the topic? No, I haven't. I know I haven't. But if you take those things up there and you begin to say, okay, what if the Corinthians did those things? Would the Corinthian church have peace if they did those things? Say, yeah, absolutely they would. Would it get rid of sin in the Corinthian church if they did those things? There'd be no doubt about it, right? Okay, well, we know how messed up the Corinthian church was. Now, our church isn't perfect. A congregation here in Monroe is not a perfect congregation. I'll be the first one to say it. We've got our own eccentricities and problems and difficulties and things like that. But, I don't think it's a big stretch to say that I think we're doing better than Corinth was. Okay? By the time Paul wrote the letter, I think we're in better shape than they were. So if these things would fix any problems the Corinthian church had, seeing how bad they were, what would it do for our congregation? Oh man, it's the answer, isn't it? And so you start talking about that idea of love, and love is this all-encompassing thing that if we will really begin to apply it in our life. Now, does it work if I take it and I say 1 Corinthians 13 about love? That would work really great if Pam would apply it. Does that work if that's the way I view it? See, I've already forgotten the whole thing, haven't I? If I start pointing it at somebody else and I say, if they'll start showing love, it'll work. Where can I apply 1 Corinthians 13? Just here, right? That's the only way it's going to work. If I point and say, boy, that's a great verse then I've missed the whole point of it. But if I'll start applying it to my life and you start applying it to your life and every one of us says, I'm going to learn to love, the amount of good that can be done is just mind-boggling. Because if Christians took that attitude of love and we perfected it and honed it and we took it out into the world around us, now you go to the grocery store, you go to work, you go to events with your friends who are not Christians, and you have that attitude of love, how many lives are you going to affect? A mighty, mighty number, isn't it? And so here's that character of love, and Paul says, you Corinthians, if you get this, if you'll get this thing, everything else begins to fall away. Now, having said that, we're going to stop here, but the last part of 1 Corinthians 13 we'll cover next week. And that part is, it starts actually with the last characteristic of love. Love never fails. Is there ever a point where love goes away? No. But now Paul's going to begin to talk about something that is going to go away, miracles. Because remember what the Corinthian church was like? All wrapped up in those miracles, aren't they? ooh, that's the big deal. The guy who can speak in tongues, the guy who can cast out demons, the guy who can heal the sick. That's what we care about. Miracles, miracles, miracles. And they kind of got real excited about that to the point where they were missing the purpose of the miracles. So Paul's going to say, now love, that's a big deal. It never goes away. But those miracles will when the perfect comes. When the perfect comes, miracles go away. And so next week we'll talk about what is the perfect. And we'll explain it so that you'll be able to not only understand it yourself, but use this set of passages to explain to other people why miracles don't happen today like they did back in the days of Christ and the apostles. Anybody have any questions? Okay, then we'll stop there, pick up next week.